Teachers of Reddit, what's your holy crap? This student is completely different from what I thought story. I had a piano student whose parents made him take lessons. He told me, right up front, he wasn't really interested in learning. After a few lessons, though, he became totally excited about learning music, and not only piano, but voice and organ, too. Today, he's a piano teacher and a gifted performer, something I would not have thought possible upon first meeting him. Kudos. Sounds like you must be a great teacher. I had a bright, well-spoken young man in my classroom, always had the correct answer when I called on him, and he volunteered frequently, struggled a bit with getting homework in on time, but that's not unusual in middle school. This was 6th grade, so this child was 10 or so, from a different district and a black male. First test comes around and he is really struggling. Now, I know this kid knows the information. He is always participating in class. Finally, he comes up to me and said, and I quote, "Mrs. I'm finding this test rather difficult to read." Fortunately, I had several students who were oral testing and I let him go in the other room and have his test read to him. I recommended him for testing. He had been skating by for years and could not read on even a 1st grade level. Just smart and a very verbal learner. Severe dyslexia. Went through the program in record time, was reading almost at grade level by the end of the year. 5th child in his family. Name was Quintus. 6th grade and this had never been addressed in his previous classes. He wasn't reading at a 1st grade level. I think the fact that he was able to answer the questions, plus being a black male, caused people to overlook his problems for so many years. He graduated with honors, but I don't know what happened to him, though I often wonder. 5th child in his family. His name was Quintus. Nice. Had a super confident kid in my adult ESL class. He knew the answers and went out of his way to demonstrate his fine English skills. He really excelled and he wanted everyone to know. He wasn't super arrogant, but he bordered on being annoying. So, he is going back home to Saudi Arabia and I noticed that he had bought his father 2 $1,000 watches. I joked that one watch would probably be enough and all his confidence melted away as he told me how his father ignored him. He said that his father didn't even say goodbye when he left for the US. In fact, he made jokes and called him a liar. He needed the watches to get his father's attention because his dad had married his 4th wife and was more interested in the new wife and kids. His dad had something like 20 kids. I thought he was going to cry. He said that he would never have more than one wife and his kids would know that they are loved. Poor kid. Well, since your dad doesn't love you, why don't you throw one of those watches my way, sonny boy? I had a kid one year who was on the average low side academically, got in a bit of trouble, but nothing awful, and could be a middling pain in the butt on a regular basis. The kind of kid that just doesn't shine in a school setting. Anyway, my class did this project and we had a long, bored line of parents waiting for something. The parents were getting restless and frustrated, and I felt terrible that I hadn't set it up better. This kid, age 8, just started working the line. "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, you coaching baseball this year? How's your team doing, Mrs. Whoever? You're looking lovely tonight. Great to see you." He had the whole crowd in the palm of his hand. I was the kid's teacher pretty early in my career, but it absolutely taught me that school is just one aspect in students' lives, and if things aren't great for the kid in school, I should look to see if there's somewhere else he can shine. Ah, a future CEO I see. I've had a couple of younger siblings who have been completely different from their older siblings. The most extreme was a boy named Joe. Joe had 3 older brothers who were always in trouble for something. I had 2 of the older brothers and whenever their mom or dad would get called in, they would blame the school and insist that their boys could do no wrong. One of them destroyed the computer room because his girlfriend broke up with him. These kids were out of control. Anyway, I see Joe's last name and automatically knew that he was related to these boys. I thought I was going to be in for another long year, but as it turns out, Joe was well behaved. He rarely missed a homework assignment and often contributed to class discussion. I never had an issue with him. Instead of destroying the school, Joe participated in the school play. He wasn't an outstanding student, but he got good grades in my class. It's really interesting to see how siblings can be so different from each other. I have 2 sons, so I try not to judge a kid based on how their older sibling was, but it's hard not to sometimes. I had a student who was an issue from 6th grade on, suspended constantly for fighting, made his 7th grade science teacher cry repeatedly, so on. His reputation preceded him when he entered my classroom, but he actually turned out to be incredibly bright, if not a little hyperactive. We worked with his hyperactivity. I learned not to admonish him for getting up to walk around the room out of turn, and he ended up not only being one of my best students but tested into honors. It turned out he had a lot of home life issues and he mostly used his behavior as a shield, but he was bright in ways you don't usually see in 8th graders. He could easily connect texts to real-world relevance and was able to discuss current events at an almost adult level. So kind of like Good Will Hunting without the kid stagnating. This is a bit more general than what you wanted, but it doesn't take long to get an idea of who seems bright and who doesn't. A few weeks at most. I have about 200 students in 8 different classes. At exam time, my guesses are usually about 90% correct. But every exam there are 2 kinds of surprise students. Those that are unexpectedly clever. These kids knew all the stuff anyway, but just didn't put up their hands or volunteer information. It could be a personality thing. Maybe they're not that social. Maybe they're shy, maybe they feel like answering too much would look egotistical, who knows, but they turn out to be just as smart, and sometimes smarter, than the ones who put their hands up all the time. B. Those who are unexpectedly stupid. These are kids who've maybe been taught by mommy and daddy to put their hands up, or did it because all the class was doing it and they don't want to look stupid, or whatever, and they appear to know the answers, but in fact were just copying whatever the smartest child in their group whispered to them. I remember one boy who made me laugh a bit. Whenever a question was asked, he would sit bolt upright in his chair, tilt his head slightly to one side, put a frown of stern concentration on his face and shoot his hand straight up. But when asked, he never actually knew the answer. He just wanted to look like he did. This made me pretty curious, so I was interested in meeting his parents. I eventually did meet his mother, who was a teacher herself. Without realizing it, she had trained him to have the appearance of paying attention and knowing what was going on. But in fact he never did. I think he just wasn't up to her intellectual expectations, so he learned to fake it. She was convinced he was the smartest boy in the class, when he was at the bottom if not the very lowest. How do you tell someone what they've done? You've trained your son to give the impression of being smart, without actually being so. You don't. I spoke to his teacher next year, and he had exactly the same impression. The unexpectedly bright ones do warm my heart though. I love that moment when I'm grading papers and going, this one is nailing it, and then I check the name for the grade book and it's the kid who daydreams in the back of the classroom, who's apparently just been chilling and taking it all in. I teach Gen Ed English composition at a university. I had a student once who I assumed was coming to class hungover. He'd sit near the back and about halfway pay attention. He'd zone out during class activities, and he barely turned in anything. I honestly didn't think a whole lot about it, since there are usually a few in each class who just won't get it together and do the work. One day he shows up in my office hours and he's looking rough as heck. He tells me that he is addicted to H and wants to get clean, but his dad has told him he either has to enroll in college or get a job if he wants to live at home. I suggest that maybe a rehab program would be a better deal, but apparently that wouldn't be covered by the crap insurance his family has access to. This is the US. Several years ago, student us failing all his classes, and has a come apart in my office because he's scared to death his dad will kick him out and he'll go back to couch surfing at his junkie friends' houses. So it becomes my mission to get this kid through English comp. When he's too sick to come to class, I make sure he has access to notes and lecture materials. He hangs out in my office when he's feeling too rough for class, and sometimes he just gets up and leaves class. But he's writing his papers, and he's learning stuff, and dang if he didn't scrape out a B. I've never seen a student work that hard against that huge of an obstacle before or since. This kid, who in week 3 I had pegged as a lazy party person, turned out to be a legitimate superhero doing something harder than anything I'd ever done. He's still one of my heroes, and also for the record he's still hammering away at a college degree, and after a few lapses here and there is over a year sober. We low-key keep in touch on Facebook. You're the crap. Had a kid transferred to us after an expulsion, autistic, had punched his previous teacher in the face. I had various meeting and training courses to prepare for this kid, learned calming techniques, anger management, physical restraint, etc etc. First day in and I'm feeling nervous, but it quickly turned out he was the nicest kid you've ever met. Bright as a button, helpful, funny, just a lovely kid to be around. It took a few weeks before he started talking about his previous school. Turns out the teacher was an abusive bee, used to make fun of him because of his very mild autism, tried to trip him up in front of his peers. I would have punched her too. Let's hope that teacher gets fired and that your student gets the justice he deserves. I work at a school where there is definitely a group of redneck kids who all drive big, loud trucks, wear giant belt buckles, and who miss school for hunting and fishing. It's not too surprising to me when some of these kids don't really have interest in reading novels and writing poetry and essays, so I at least always try to steer these kids towards writing about and researching things they would be interested in, like how hunters positively influence conservation, and the benefits of getting into the trades. Generally, their writing skills aren't great when they manage to turn papers in at all. Last year I had a kid we'll call Cody. Cody was one of these kids and he made absolutely no bones about not liking English class and writing. He would even ask me straight out what he could get away with doing in his essays just to get a C. I expected horrible spelling and grammar, no research, bullshitted or flat out plagiarized papers from him, and I was entirely prepared to see him the next year after he flunked out of my class. I mean, the kid spent my class playing online games and reading the farm co-op flyers. When I started getting his stories and essays, though, albeit very late, he wrote articulately and thoughtfully about his subjects, and he always got a much better grade than just a C. For example, he wrote a detailed and very original paper about the American dream and the characters in Of Mice and Men, but also how the book can inform modern society about how the dream has changed and how we can live our version of it. Even now when I see Cody, he always says hi to me and pokes fun at me because we both know that, even though he didn't like it, I can at least poke fun that he turned out to be good at English class. I still make sure to tell him that he shouldn't sell himself short or take the easy way, just because it's easy. I make sure Cody knows that he has talent that others might not see because of the snap judgments like I had made. He might like English more than he says. There are people who hate to write but do it very well, but they're not the norm. Sometimes students feel the need to perform not liking to write for the sake of their friends' perceptions. Used to tutor English for this Chinese kid for months. One day he was somewhat off. I didn't know he had an identical twin and that they'd switched places more than once before I realized such fact. Saving money by having you tutor one for the price of two. Not when I was a teacher, but in second grade our desks were arranged into clumps of 4. On the first day of school I found out that one of the students at my clump was actually named Lawrence Lightning. But he didn't show up the entire day, or the next day, or the day after that. Where was he? What was delaying him? Was he scaling Mt. Everest? Was he assassinating a dictator in South America? Was he presenting his discovery of the cure for cancer to the president? Was he liberating an enslaved alien race in an alternate dimension? My anticipation to find out kept growing. He finally came to school at the start of week 2. He was just a generic looking fat kid. He had missed the first few days of school because he was visiting family in Oklahoma. I was very disappointed. What a great name. I teach in China, and my students get to pick their own English names. One of my students was a very cute, friendly and popular girl named KFC. When I asked her why she was named KFC, she said because everybody likes KFC. I couldn't help laughing. I had a student one year who was a very proud lesbian and was never afraid to share with the class how disgusting men were to her and how not attracted she was to men. One day, another teacher frantically ran into my room stammering, crying, and pale as a ghost. I was terrified because I thought one of her kids was hurt. Someone died. Something horrible happened. Well, something traumatic had indeed happened. She walked in on the lesbian student having sex in the art room with a young man. Needless to say, that was surprising to many of us and not at all what we expected. I know a few girls who act like this and are super adamant about their lesbian lifestyle, but they've all ended up marrying or having kids with guys. It's so weird. It has happened so often that I'm suspicious when they're super loud and proud like that. I had a student glare at me silently the entire semester. In physical anthropology, I teach evolution and such, so thought he was a generic fundamentalist gritting his teeth for the credits or something. At the end of the course he came up to me and was like, "This was the best class. I learned so much. Thank you." Maybe his face just looks like that naturally. I've never seen a picture of myself where I don't look a serial killer's mugshot. I had a boy who was very quiet, very nice and respectful. He wasn't a great student, but after he made it through my class, he would come back to visit me every week or so. He was still at the school. He made me birthday cards, wrote me a letter for Christmas, etc. Last year he was arrested for stalking and sexually harassing a younger student. Totally not the kid I would have ever expected that from. I teach shop classes. Everything from electrical to plumbing to welding and so on. I always keep an eye out for students that I have heard from other teachers about, ones who cause trouble, as those are the ones I keep a very close eye on for safety reasons. This year, I got a student I had heard nothing but bad things on. Very rude, doesn't respect rules, doesn't do work. Thought he would be a handful. He's the best worker I have this year. Everything we do, he's excited to do it. It's awesome. I have had a lot of those students. They aren't a handful. They are bored. Either bored because they aren't being challenged or bored because they don't think that they can rise above that challenge. One grade 5 kid was always acting up, drawing attention to himself, not paying attention, couldn't speak a word of English class in Korea, could barely handle Korean, bothered other students constantly. He used to be a headache every time because he was always bothering other students. Then one day I saw him hugging another student, both of them happy to sit hugging. Turns out they were twins and only saw each other sometimes at school because their parents divorced and the father took one kid that looked like him and left the other with his mother. His mother often went to China, so the kids might not see each other for long periods of time. He broke my heart. He was still a terrible student, but I gave him much more patience. As a twin this sounds awful. At that age I just couldn't live without my bro. I had a kid start just this year and was told he was wild. That he climbed all over his mom during his registration and had a long list of behavior issues. I teach preschool, so it's common for our class to be a child's first experience with schedules and school. I braced for the worst. The first day he actually was a little squirmy, refused to follow directions, told me he hated me, dumped huge buckets of toys on the floor and refused to clean up. I was beginning to form a behavior plan for him. By the end of the week, we saw slight improvement. By the next week he was following all the procedures and could be redirected easily. We've been in school almost 2 months now and he loves us. Wants to talk to me constantly. Has to get a hug before he leaves. I must sit by him at lunch every day or he cries. He still has his stubborn moments, but I can always get through to him. We've built this relationship of respect and he knows when I mean business that it's serious, but that I do genuinely care for him. I've been blown away. I'm a new teacher and to see just a complete turnaround like that was astonishing to me. Sometimes all they need is a little consistent structure and TLC. I coach track and field, specifically pole vault, and have been doing so for about 4 years now. I'm in my early 20s, so the kids see me more as an older brother than they do a strict authority figure. I thought it was just going to be me coaching the sport I love and helping kids become better at the sport, but until my second year I had no idea what I actually was to these kids. They come to me with questions they won't dare ask their parents or any of the older coaches. They ask for life advice, relationship advice, and I've even had one ask about sex since their parents refused to teach them about it. It is a lot of pressure because now I know that what I do now can impact these kids for the rest of their lives. It's not what I signed up for, but I won't change it for the world. We need more coaches like you around. My tennis coach is pretty young and very relatable, so I would come to him for advice and speak my mind out to him. It's like having an older brother. He has made an impact on me as a role model and has led me into something bigger and better. not a teacher, but an English teacher I was really close to in 10th grade told me of a student she had who startled her, and it equally startled me. I'll name him Jason. Jason was definitely one of the redneck guys. I knew him from a camping trip I went on with some friends that he ended up going on as well. A pretty cool guy, but fit the stereotype perfectly. Tall and wore the slightly oversized clothes that were stained from hunting or going to the river. Pretty bulky too. He had a very thick southern accent and generally didn't give any shoots about this English class. Can't articulate complete sentences and fit in completely with all of the other rednecks in the school. The teacher had to fight him to turn in the first essay of the year, several weeks after it was due, just like she did for all of the rest of them. As the teacher was telling me that he turned it in late, she digs around on her desk to find that essay. My jaw hits the ground when she hands it to me. This guy could have written the Constitution. His handwriting looked like freaking calligraphy. It was such nice cursive it could have been typed with one of those super fancy fonts and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Then she shows me some of the other worksheets he's turned in. They're all the same. This wear hunting boots and drive a huge muddy truck to school guy wrote better than John Hancock. It still shocks me when I see him around and think that man puts the world of writing to shame. Was expecting something bad. That's actually surprising. Funny how the teacher liked it so much they kept it. My partner teaches at a private school. At the beginning of the year, he got a document full of each student's problems. Every other kid seemed to have ADHD, and many were diagnosed with severe learning disorders and executive function issues. According to this document, they needed all kinds of accommodations just to handle sitting through a single class period. They're all perfectly normal kids. A few do have legit, but easily managed, learning disorders. They perform at a really high level, although some clearly have anxiety issues caused by the pressure their parents put on them. The school has a counselor who keeps throwing out diagnoses left and right, making these kids think they're struggling when they're doing just fine. The counselor was probably looking for government money. The more SPED students a school has, the more federal money they get. Just a guess. I am not the teacher but the student. I was going through a rough stage in high school and would always smoke weed and go to class. In my philosophy class, I would never talk and stayed absolutely silent. Halfway through the semester, he asks a question that I have a personal story that is relevant. So I put up my hand and tell it. He starts flailing his arms around wildly. After I answer and I just think, did I do something wrong? He stops and says, sorry class, I am just in complete shock right now. This guy has been sitting here quiet for the whole semester. He finally puts up his and has something insightful to say. I felt a little embarrassed for being put on the spot, but it also felt nice. Later on he pulled me aside and said, get your really late assignments in and he'll still mark it. At that time, I had so much going on my life. I wasn't ready to take school seriously, so I ended up failing the class. I ran into him one day, a few months later, and he said, you know, if you handed in your stuff I would have passed you no problem. I responded, I know sir, and I always appreciated that. Took a few years, but I am finally ready. I am in my first year of social work at college to help kids who struggled like me. When you get the ball rolling, that teacher would be pleased to hear from you if they're still around. Very first teaching job. I was naive, 21 years old, and from a very rural area. My first teaching job was in a town close to Wichita, KS. I taught art and had a kid who was in several of my classes. He was talented, but more than that, a very polite student, saying yes mom and doing whatever I asked with no hesitation. One day, he comes to school really early and tells me he needs his artwork sketchbook as his mom and him were moving away. When I asked when, he said they were leaving as soon as he returned to the car. Later, one of the other teachers filled me in. The kid not only was in a gang, he was higher up, and last night someone from a rival gang had shot at his house. And then they told me the kicker. The reason he was at that school was because he had been kicked out of all the other schools in Wichita for violence and had just been released from the juvenile detention center for violently attacking a young woman at a party. There were rumors he did a lot worse, but no evidence. Never would have thought he had an angry bone in his body until that day. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.